Hello! So I bought a few books over the last 2 months. I haven't shared them yet. There's probably about 20. I have only 10 to share with you today because it will take too long. And with that being said, let's look at the actual books.
I'm about to bust.
So the first book I got is The Mystic Mind, The Psychology of Asceticism. I think it goes over the medieval and ancient aesthetics. I got this book because people would not eat my cooking, and so I thought maybe people were being ascetics without me realizing. Now, seriousness though, I'm actually getting into the topic of asceticism, which I think is a very fascinating topic. This book is one of the 3 books that I got, and this one is a little bit more scientific with its approach to asceticism. It will go over how ascetic practices like starvation, sleep deprivation, prayer, vigil, so on and so forth, actually impact someone's mind, right? Because it's a psychiatrist and a historian of religion that are writing this book. It'll talk about how it impacts people's minds and how that leads to different mystical experiences. So like, for example, how sleep deprivation can lead to hallucination, and even how these practices actually impact personal beliefs.
Well, it all comes from eating too much.
So this is going to be the more scientific book I have on asceticism. The next book is another book on asceticism. It is The Asceticism of Isaac Nineveh. I don't know how you say this. The other way it was written in this book is Isaac the Syrian. This obviously was a famous ascetic, and the book goes over the different practices this particular ascetic engaged in, what he believed their purposes were, and he also goes over Isaac's personal philosophy of asceticism. For example, Isaac believed that ascetics were to demonstrate that God's kingdom existed in earth.
Oh yeah.
He also goes over some of his personal beliefs about why you would engage in asceticism. I suspect I will disagree with a lot of the contents of this book. However, my main purpose behind reading this is one, to get like a very in-depth view of a very seriously respected ascetic, but also to reverse engineer the questions that Isaac was answering through his philosophy. Because I think that stuff on its own is interesting. I'm really hyped up to read this book as well.
Up to bust.
So this next book is Cloth and the Body, Asceticism, the Body, and the Spiritual in the Late Antique Era. The cover reminds me of like Asmongold a little bit. I wonder if you could classify Asmongold as like an ascetic, because he deprives his physical body to enhance his virtual character. You know, he won't shower, he won't eat, he's got to grind XP and stuff like this. It's a very interesting question. This book will go over the different philosophies of ascetics, not just like religious ones. I believe it was also secular ones. It will talk about, for example, how ascetics could view depriving one's body as focusing on their own mind. You could also view religious ascetics taking this notion of depriving one's body in the face of great physical temptation. So if they're sleep deprived or deprived from food, there'll obviously be hunger or want to sleep. They'll have these things. And so in face of those temptations, they continue to engage in their ascetic practices to demonstrate their spirituality, putting their spirituality before their physical needs and temptations.
Wow.
Yeah, this book will basically go over the different philosophies behind asceticism, which is actually what I really, really wanted, alongside the psychology one. And I'm also really hyped to get to read this one as well. I'll let you guys know how it is. The next book is Super Freakonomics. I believe there is a book that came before this one called Freakonomics, and I believe the economists who wrote these books also have their own books. The general premise or premises of this book is to find really strange correlations and provide insights as to why they correlate. The best examples I can give actually come from the table of contents. So I will read some of these to you. How is a street prostitute like a department store Santa? Why should suicide bombers buy life insurance? What do Al Gore and Mount Pinatubo have in common?
Huh?
So basically, if you get the table of contents, they're going to look at really strange things that could correlate and provide insights for them. That's the best way of explaining the book. I got it simply because, yeah, it's a really fun read. So just how having to walk to the kitchen can deter me from eating snacks. By the same token, this next book, Power of Geography by Tim Marshall, which is an extension of his book Prisoners of Geography, will explain how geography determines policy. So if you're not familiar with Tim Marshall, he's a journalist, and his book Prisoners of Geography basically talks about how mountains, rivers, and being landlocked or access to natural resources, basically the starting conditions of your country, like you imagine if it's like a civilization game, determine the kind of route you can take as a country. Prisoners of Geography was a little bit smaller. This one's a little bit bigger, and I think it's a more systematic explanation of how geography determines policy. On top of that, I got the last book of his that I need to read, which is Shadow Play, Powers of Geography and Shadow Play. And this is just going to go over his experiences in Kosovo. I think he was a journalist there at the time. And he's going to explain to us what he saw, his recounting of the events, and so on and so forth. Tim Marshall's a great writer, and I'm excited to read both of these books and officially be able to say I've read every Tim Marshall book. Unless I find out that there's another one.
Another one.
The next book that I got was Byzantium, The Surprising Life of a Medieval Empire. So I'm slowly collecting Roman history books. I'm like, basically I'll read a history book of Rome every 1 or 2 months. Even the Ottoman Empire, I'll do this. And basically what this book is going to go over is Byzantium itself. Now whenever you hear the term Byzantium, everyone wants to go, did you know Byzantium was separated from the rest of Rome, even though it was called Rome?
Surprised you didn't know that.
Like, that's the most common fact. And because I want to know more than just that, I got this book. This book is going to go over all the stuff inside Byzantium. So, for example, political institutions, social institutions, legal systems, how their legal system differentiated from the capital, the economic institutions that they had. Basically, it will cover the entire kind of circumstances inside Byzantium and what led it to be such a prosperous city, or empire, you could say. The next book I got was Black Swan. Now, I have to say this right out of the gate, I refuse to get Nassim Taleb's books because whenever I see him tweeting away on Twitter, I just got bad vibes from him, and that gave me a bad impression of his writing.
I'm gonna hang by the bar. Put out the vibe. Okay.
However, I'm going to give him a chance. I'm going to read this book, and if this book is good, I'll read the rest of his works. I actually don't know what the book is about. I'm going to guess it has something to do with probability theory because it has Black Swan on the cover, which is like a big meme in probability theory, or philosophy of math. I don't know which one it is. So I'll give it a try. I'll let you guys know how it is, but I'm a bit suspicious because I always got bad vibes from his Twitter. We'll see how it goes. The next book I got was How Innovation Works. I love discussions about innovations. I like Walter Isaacson's book on innovations or innovators. And I looked through this book and I saw it actually had some sources. And one of the problems, I've mentioned this so many times with business books, but especially with innovation books, is people spewing theory with nothing concrete to talk about.
Blah, 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 blah.
This book, I believe, goes beyond just the abstractions and gets into the actual concrete nitty-gritty. And so I'm kind of excited to read this book, and I will let you know how it goes, but I'm not going to read it anytime soon. As you see, I have a bunch of books on my list, so don't get your hopes up. Zero Waste Home. You guys probably will not know this book, but basically it's a book about sustainable practices you can implement at your home. I'm pretty sold on sustainability. I think it's something that everybody should do and people should engage in when they can. And so I'm going to read this book. I don't know if it's scientific or not. I don't know if it's pseudoscience. I have no clue. I'm going to read through the book. The book has a lot of suggestions and tips to offer. And so I will look through these, adopt the ones I can, or the ones that I need to, and I will research if any of them are good or not. I don't think I'm going to do a book review on this, but yeah, it's a book that I got just because I want to be sustainable. The next book is the autobiography by Benjamin Franklin. Let me say, right out of the gate, this book is overhyped.
Damn!
It will not live up to the hype that it gets. And for example, I read some of the sentences in this book, and like, it's literally just someone's throwing a barrage of commas at you. He doesn't know how a period works. He just throws comma after comma after comma after comma. So I definitely think the book is overhyped. That being said, I do want to get into autobiographies, and this one was small. My qualm with autobiographies is they're usually written bad. Biographers are actually quite skilled at organizing someone's life, knowing where to put details, knowing where to provide insights. I think biographers are really good at that. I think autobiographies are like written by people who are just amateur at biographies. You could say that there's some first-person insight provided by an autobiography, but biographers usually know how to get the good questions answered and know how to like basically ignore the questions that people aren't going to want answered. And I think people who write autobiographies tend to answer questions that aren't needed to be answered. So I'll let you know how it goes, but again, not high hopes. I think it's overrated. The last book on the list is The Black Wave. Somebody recommended this book to me. I'm surprised I didn't know it existed, or at least didn't know what it was about. Basically, this book will tie a lot of the conflicts in the Middle East to three major events that happened in 1979. It'll tie it to the Iranian Revolution, the siege of the Holy Mosque in Mecca, and the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. Basically, the author is going to argue, from my understanding, is that those three events caused a lot of tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that gave rise to the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which now has its roots in many conflicts across the Middle East. It should be an interesting book. I've never heard of a book on Middle Eastern history that argues from a perspective like this, with such a specific claim. I love when books make such specific claims. And I'm excited to read it. So those are the new books I got. Let me know if you've read them, what you think, if there's any biases I should be looking out for when I read them, or if you thought they were better books than I'm kind of leading on to think, leading on to believe. And with that being said, tschüss.